Hi, I'm Paul Battaglia, and this is section 13.2, Analyzing Data. You know, at first glance, when you look through this section, you might think to yourself, well, my students have probably seen this before, so I really don't have to cover it too much. And if you really look carefully, don't be fooled. There's a lot to go into here. And actually, from a teacher standpoint, I like to go through this stuff with my students because I actually think that this section gives me the opportunity to inspire students to look forward into statistics perhaps more after they leave my class. So with all the things that we have to talk about, I've brought along Gabe and Brittany. And Gabe, get us started a little bit about how we can introduce this section.
Sure. So this section starts with some concepts that students most likely are familiar with. So it starts with the measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. And these are things that students have probably been working with for years. So I like to just quickly review the definitions of mean, median, and mode. And then from there, I like to actually talk about, well, how can we interpret the mean, median, mode of a data set? And not only that, but maybe going a little bit to, when is it better to use one of those three. Yeah. So for instance, an example that I like to give my students is, imagine we have a small class of just 5 students per se. So let's say they all took an exam and the exam scores were 95, 85, 90, 92, and one of the students missed the exam. So in the grade book, it's saying he has a 0. And what we'll say here is, well, if we look at this average, it'll be much lower than we should expect it to be because that 0, that outlier drags the score down. But if we looked at the median, it would be a better representative of the true mean. So the typical value from the data set. So that's something that I like to share with my students, just to get them used to the idea of, well, maybe the mean isn't always the best measure of central tendency.
Perfect. And I think now that Gabe's explained how we work with those measures, I think what's interesting here is you may have students who say, okay, so yep, that sounds about right. Done that. Okay, so is that pretty much sum up statistics? And Brittany, that's certainly not true, right? So where do we go from here?
So now we can talk about the spread of the data. So that means variance and standard deviation. We'll be talking about.
I don't spend a lot of time on variance, or
variance, not so much. Standard deviation, a lot more. Just because of the units, it's easier to not have squared units.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
So talking about standard deviation, I don't make them memorize the formula. Instead, I want them to be able to interpret, what does the standard deviation mean? What does this mean in terms of the context of the data?
You know, students have heard, I think I've found at least, they've heard this phrase, the bell curve, you know, but they don't know that it has a formal name. So we like to end this section talking about the normal distribution and normal probability. So talk to us a little bit about what you want your students to notice about that.
So I want them to notice the empirical rule in here. We don't call it that. We just say 68% of the data fall within 1 standard deviation, 95% within 2 standard deviations. And I want them to notice that, and I have them actually draw out the normal curve and look at that, and then kind of go into, well, what does that mean? And actually, we start to look at z-scores also. To see what value, how many standard deviations away it is from the mean.
And do you ever find that your students are misinterpreting a z-score or thinking that it maybe can or can't be anything? Or?
Yes. So it can be plus or minus something. And the reason, if it's a negative, it just means that it's below the mean. Well, positive means it's above the mean, the value is.
Perfect. I hope these tips have been helpful for you and you find much success in section 13.2.